If this animal walked out of the fog today, most people would call it a rhinoceros. It had the heavy body, the thick legs, and two enormous horns rising from its face. But that name would be wrong. Arsinoitherium was not a rhino. It was a different kind of mammal. One that makes the same question hard to ignore. Why would evolution build something that looked so familiar from a completely different branch of life? In the low light of an ancient morning, its outline would have been easy to misunderstand. A broad body moves through the mist. Heavy feet press into wet ground. Mud folds under the weight. For a moment, all the clues seem to point in one direction. A horned giant, a grazing animal, a prehistoric version of something we already know. But the closer it comes, the stranger it becomes. The horns are not quite right. The head is not quite right. The animal belongs to a world that is not quite the one we expect. And this world is not quiet for long. Near the wet edge of the trees, a smaller animal falls behind the group. The ground is soft there. Each step pulls at its feet. The larger adults keep moving, but the gap begins to open. Then the reeds move. A low hyenodont-like carnivorous mammal breaks from cover. It does not wait at the edge. It rushes in. The smaller animal turns too late. The predator clamps onto the side of its neck and shoulder, driving it off balance into the mud. The struggle is short, rough, and close. The smaller animal twists, its legs slipping under it. The adult Arsinoitherium reacts before the attacker can pull it down. The huge body turns, the head drops. The horns swing low through the wet air. Then the adult drives forward with a short, heavy charge. The impact hits from the side. Mud splashes low around the feet. The predator loses its hold and skids across the wet ground. For a moment, both animals are separated by churned wet ground and bent, broken plants. The predator does not try again. The smaller animal pushes itself upright and moves back toward the group. The adults shift position around it. The herd does not run. It changes the shape of the space. The attacker was not a wolf. It was not a cat. It belonged to an older world of mammalian predators, hyenodont, like carnivores that filled some of the dangerous spaces before the modern predator families we know today. In a wet place like this, an animal like that did not need to bring down the largest body in the herd. It only needed a gap, a smaller animal, a slow turn, a patch of ground soft enough to steal balance. That is why its presence matters. The predator is not here just to create danger. It shows what kind of world Arsinoitherium had to live inside. A world where size, spacing, footing, and reaction time could decide what happened next. A body like this was not built only to look strange. It had to carry weight. It had to move through difficult ground. And when pressure came close, it had to make that weight matter. The easy comparison is still the rhinoceros. That is what our eyes reach for. A thick body, a low head, a horned face. But living rhinos and Arsinoitherium were not the same answer. Modern rhinos carry horns made of keratin. Arsinoitherium carried large bony structures rising from the skull itself. That difference matters. It means the resemblance is not just a simple match. It is a warning. Evolution can make two animals look familiar for very different reasons. A heavy head changes everything. The neck has to support it. The front of the body has to carry it. The legs have to take the weight when the animal lowers its head, turns, pushes through vegetation, or shifts on uneven ground. In a clean museum drawing, that can look simple. In wet earth, it is not simple at all. The animal's whole body becomes a system of support. The feet find ground, the shoulders, the skull leads the movement. The horns sit at the front of that system like architecture. And that architecture does not matter only when a predator appears. At the edge of a feeding patch, another adult moves in too close. The vegetation is thicker here. The ground is firmer. The place is worth holding. One animal lowers its head. The other does the same. For a few seconds, neither one gives way. Then they collide. Not in a long battle, not in a frenzy. Just one heavy direct impact, skull against skull, shoulder against shoulder. The force pushes through both bodies and into the ground. Wet soil compresses beneath their feet, and a few plant stems tear loose at the edge of the shove. One animal holds its angle. The other shifts sideways, loses the line, and steps back. The contest ends almost as quickly as it began. No chase follows. No wound is needed for the outcome to be clear. The stronger position remains occupied. The other animal moves to the edge. Whatever the horns did in life, they belonged to an animal that carried its head like a piece of living structure. They may have helped animals recognize each other. They may have mattered in display. They may have helped in contests between individuals, or in making space around, but they were not decorations added to a rhino. They were part of a different animal, a different branch, a different experiment. To understand why such a body could exist, the animal has to be placed back into its world. The old Fayum was not empty. It was a wet, layered landscape. There were water edges, soft banks, vegetation patches, and places where the ground changed after rain. A large herbivore in that setting did not simply stand and eat all day. It moved between usable patches. It watched the edges of cover. It rested when the cost of movement rose. It used its size not just to feed, but to make a place for itself. And other animals had to make their own living there too. In the same low vegetation, the predator returns to motion. This time, it does not test an Arsinoitherium. It moves toward a smaller herbivore near. Too late. The hyenodont, like predator lunges from the side, catches the neck and drives its weight downward. The smaller animal collapses into the mud. The predator holds it still, then drags it backward into cover. The scene is over quickly. There is no need to see blood for the message to land. In this ecosystem, a mistake could close around the neck in a single second. For smaller animals, the edge of the vegetation was not just a place to feed. It was a place where the world could suddenly grab back. That changes how Arsinoitherium should be seen. Its size was not just bulk. Its horns were not just a strange outline. Its body created distance. Its map for an animal built more for weight than speed. Controlling space may have been one of its most important advantages. In bright daylight, the body becomes clearer. The legs are not built for delicate speed, they are built for load. The skull is not light. The shoulders are not decorative bulk. Every part of the animal points back to the same problem. How does a large herbivore live in a world that is wet, crowded, and constantly changing under its feet? A feeding animal gives one answer. Arsinoitherium lowers its head near the vegetation. It pulls at plants growing close to the water edge. For a moment, the scene is quiet. But feeding is only one state in the animal's life. A bird lifts from the reeds, water shifts nearby. The head rises again. The animal pauses before taking another step. That pause is as important as the feeding. A large herbivore survives by eating, but also by watching, by choosing, by not wasting movement, by knowing when to stay and when to leave. The fossils bring the living animal back into focus. The mistake also has a history. More than a century ago, fossils from the Jebel Qatrani Formation in Egypt's Fayum Depression gave scientists an animal that looked at first glance almost familiar. Beadnell described Arsinoitherium in 1902, but the skull did not lead to a rhinoceros. It led to a lost branch. The skull carried the same trap as the living silhouette. It invited the wrong word, rhino. But the evidence points somewhere else. Arsinoitherium belonged to Embrithopoda, an extinct order of mammals. It was not part of the rhinoceros line. It was one of those lost branches that make the mammal family tree feel much less simple than it looks in schoolbook diagrams. This is why Arsinoitherium is more than an odd animal with two horns. It shows that evolution does not always make novelty look new. Sometimes, a body plan can feel familiar, because different animals face similar problems. Large herbivores have to support weight. They have to protect space. They have to reach food. They have to move through terrain that may not cooperate. In one branch, those pressures help shape rhinoceroses. In another, they help explain why Arsinoitherium could look so close to that idea, while belonging to a very different story. The comparison should not be turned into a ladder. Arsinoitherium did not become a rhino. Rhinos did not come from Arsinoitherium. They were not two steps in a straight line. They were separate branches, and the resemblance is what makes the question interesting. Nature had already tested the value of a heavy, horned herbivore long before the animals we call rhinos became familiar to us. And in Arsinoitherium, that test took a strange form. A form with paired bony horns, a massive skull, a body that seemed to carry its own landscape with it. The day does not stay still. Rain passes over the lowland. The surface of the ground changes. A patch that held weight in the morning becomes soft by afternoon. One adult steps too far into the darker mud. The front foot sinks. The body tips forward. For a moment, the skull drops low and the shoulders take the full load. The animal pulls back, but the mud holds. It shifts its weight. The rear legs brace. The front limb tears free with a heavy surge, kicking small wet clods backward. The animal does not fall, but the struggle shows the cost of the body. Strength does not erase the ground. A large animal still has to negotiate with every surface it crosses. The herd shifts away from the soft patch. One animal steps around a pool of dark water. Another stops under thicker cover. The body that looked so powerful in a still image now has to make decisions one step at a time. Later, in low evening light, the pressure returns from the edge. The group is moving toward firmer ground. The smaller animal stays close this time. A predator follows along the vegetation line, not rushing in, but waiting for a gap. The gap opens for only a moment. The predator darts in and snaps at the flank of the smaller animal. The adult beside it turns hard. A shoulder drives across the line of attack. The attacker is struck, not crushed, but knocked out of position. It tumbles sideways through the wet plants and disappears back into cover. The group continues. Not faster, tighter. The lesson is not that Arsinoitherium was invincible. It was not. A body this large has limits. It needs rest. It needs enough food. It needs ground that will not waste its strength. It needs water and vegetation in the right places. And it needs time. A night scene changes the animal again. In silhouette, the horns are still the first thing the eye finds. But the animal is not a monster in the dark. It is a herbivore holding its place, breathing, listening, waiting for the world to become readable again. This is the part of extinct animals that often gets lost. We remember the skull. We remember the horns. We remember the strange outline. But the animal was not a symbol. It had hours of quiet, moments of pressure, short impacts, close escapes, small choices repeated across a lifetime, places it could move through and places it could not, food it could use and food that would not last forever. That is where the cost of a body like this begins to show. A large body can be power. It can make an animal difficult to move. It can make predators hesitate. It can let a herbivore reach and process enough food to support its weight. But the same body also more stable ground, more usable habitat, more time to move between safe places. If the wet edges shrink, the animal has to travel farther. If vegetation changes, feeding becomes less simple. If open ground replaces cover, or if water no longer shapes the land in the same way, the advantages of a heavy specialized body begin to narrow. This does not mean one simple cause explains the end of Arsinoitherium. Extinction is rarely that clean, but the body itself tells us that survival depended on a relationship with the world around it. The animal was not separate from the ground, the plants, the water, or the other animals moving at the edge of its life. It was built for a set of conditions, and when those conditions changed, the same features that once made sense could become costly. The fossils remain after the world disappears. A skull in a horned profile. A shape that still tricks the eye. Look at it quickly, and the old mistake returns. A rhinoceros. But now the mistake has changed. It is no longer just an error. It is the point. Arsinoitherium looked familiar, because evolution can arrive at familiar-looking solutions from unfamiliar places. It shows how easily the eye can flatten deep time into something it already knows. And it reminds us that the history of mammals was not a neat march toward the animals alive today. It was full of branches that worked for a while. Branches that became large, strange, powerful, and specialized. Branches that left behind enough bone to make us ask the wrong question first. The next time the horns appear in the fog, the answer is not rhinoceros, it is Arsinoitherium. A lost mammal from a wet African world, a heavy animal built for weight, space, impact, and pressure. And one of evolution's clearest reminders that familiar shapes can come from very unfamiliar stories.